Okay, here's a pre-bent bindings. We're getting ready to fit these now. And they're going to go on just like this. You can see they already fit pretty good. We have one problem in that here at the top, we're going to need to chisel away material both at the top and at the bottom, and I'll show you. Both at the back end and at the top end, we need to remove this material with a chisel. And we need to remove it at the same distance in as the purflings on the top. And then on the back, we're actually going to have the bindings touch in the middle here. So we're going to have to remove this whole bit of material inside of here, which we need to do by hand. There's really no way we can do this with a machine. Start by measuring the depth of the channel. Then transfer that depth to the part that is to be removed on both sides. Just as with the purflings, cut down first with a knife. Cut in the end point with a chisel and begin to remove the material. What I've done here is snipped off a piece of the end of the binding, which is actually a waist. And I've thinned it down a little bit so it'll fit in here easy. And this is the real tail for your fit. Now that is pretty good. Notice there's still a little material above the line. The line is only a guideline. It's there so that you have something to work towards and not to go past. But rarely is the line the best indicator. Usually the best thing is to take a piece of the binding like that. And what you want is straight across with no gaps. The other side of the top is done exactly the same way. To fit the bindings on the top, it's pretty simple. You just want to tape it in at the waist here and then push it over as tightly as you can to the edge, and then just sight down where this ends here. And we're going to line this edge up with the center line of the top. And this one needs to be pretty accurate. I've extended these lines across the inside here. We're just going to cut along the line. Now on this back edge, you want to leave a little beyond the line and then sand to it. I'll show you. It's really important to get this back edge right. We're actually going to begin gluing it from the back edge, because that has to fit nice and cleanly together. This is all fitting good. We got this waist area dialed in. And now we're right on the center line. We do the same thing to this side. Okay. I'll fit this in here. And again, this waist area is important. You want to always measure from that same waist area. That's why we're not taking it off here and pushing it forward. Now that fits right. Okay, we're ready to glue this. You want to get a good amount of glue on here. It might be a little sloppier than you're used to doing, but you need to get a good amount of glue in here. So we're going to apply the glue around. And notice also I've prepared some tape to get me going. If you do this by yourself, I suggest you do the same thing. Now we got a lot of glue dripping here. So we need to move quickly. And you want to see squeeze out both on the top and on the bottom. And what I usually do is like to clean off a little bit of this bottom bit, because that's where most of your squeeze out's going to come. To put these on, I always start in the back. Now, the other thing is, if you use a vise like this, you need to get it good and tight, because you're going to use a considerable amount of pressure here, and it'll be easy to move your vise. You want to make sure you got glue right up to the end piece here. And we're trying to be neat, believe it or not. We always start at the back seam, because we need to join the two pieces there, and it's going to be real difficult if you start at the other end. So this is where we're going to start. And that's pretty good. Now when you put this on, there's two directions of force, down and in. So you want to push down with your thumb and in. This is going to fight me unless I do something about it. So what I'm going to do is temporarily tape this here so that it's not fighting me along the way. And I'm going to continue. And if you get glue all over the place, it's okay. Just try to minimize your slop, because you will have to clean it up later. But like I said, this is a sloppy process. Now use white glue to do this, because it gives you more setup time than yellow glue. If you use yellow glue, you really have to move fast. Now this bit, we just slide in like that. You want to make sure this is all the way down, so use a clamp. In this waist area, we'll be using clamps in here, so I just want to get it home now. We'll worry about closing a little bit later. And we're going to do the other side right now. We're just going to finish up this side and then quickly switch and do the other side right away. You want to get this seam together as good as you can. And I'm going to begin on taping down here just like on the other side. Now, when you put this one on, you want to push it into the other one besides pushing it down and in. Okay, and again, we'll temporarily put some tape up here so we're not fighting this down here. And you want to clean as you go. Again, up here in the waist, we're going to be putting some blocks in here. So what I usually like to do is just like that. You leave a little opening so that you can see when we put the clamps on that it's closing in there. Let's pop this in. There we go. Okay. You want to clamp this down all the way around the perimeter. And I use these cam clamps just to make sure the bindings are all the way down in the channel. Now, I haven't tightened them up yet. I've just sort of sprinkled them around. And we want to leave enough opening to get the waist area blocks in there. In this waist area, actually, right up until the time we put that block in there, we can move these in pretty close so that we get this closed good. And then we'll move them. So we still have some clamps to tighten here. What I've got are these two blocks which span the width of the sides, and they've got the contour at the waist carved into them. And I'm going to put one on this side and one on this side and use a clamp to bring those bits home. And actually they are already. This is just an assurance. And you can see in the little bit where you left the tape off that it's closed. This is a 30-inch clamp. And as you can see, I'll move this out of the way. You just want to bring this bit home here. Right here, you want it flush up against the guitar. And then we could replace this one, and now we're done. We won't come and bother this until tomorrow, and we'll put the other side on. I've removed the tape from these top bindings, and they are fitting really well. All you want to do at this point is to just take a little bit off and flatten them, but still leave them a little proud. You don't want to plane them down to the surface of the top just yet, because we're going to use this as a clamping surface for the bindings on the other side when we clamp them down. This way you won't be putting any clamp pressure on your top. So we're going to leave them a little proud like they are here. We flatten them a little with the hand plane, and now we're going to try to address the back. Bindings go on like this, and then behind the heel they're going to meet right in the middle here. So we're going to have one coming from here, one coming from here. So we have to chop out this material here to fit this in. So the first thing we're going to do is score this wood with a knife up in here. And then we're going to chop it away with the chisel. Now just be real careful not to chop away the edge of your heel. Although the heel isn't at final shape or size yet, we want to keep it as close to where it is as we can. And do this slowly and carefully, and just score a little, chop a little, and leave the tang. In other words, that little bit of the heel that butts up against the purflings there, leave that. Don't be chopping that away yet. We're going to actually saw through that. Now, once again, so that you don't chop too far, it's a good idea to put some marks in there. So that's what we're going to do right now. You want to continue this baseline here all the way up to the heel, just to give you a guide as to where to stop. That line all the way in. And that's probably good enough. It doesn't have to be all accurate. You're just looking to have a little guide there. And for our purposes right now, that's pretty good. We'll dress it to the final degree when we actually go to fit the bindings. And now we're going to do the other side. Okay, and now we're ready to cut this tang away. What we're going to do is we're going to cut both on the inside up against the purflings and the outside where the binding outer edge meets. So we're going to cut down to the level of the channel on both sides. And it comes out fairly easily. This is good enough now where we can begin to fit the bindings. Before you fit the bindings though, one thing you want to check, you want to go all the way around and make sure that you've got, purflings here, like up here. The purfling is actually inside the channel. The channel needs to be chopped slightly here. So you just want to find these little spots. You might have them on the back, since the back is tilted and it's domed and everything like that. You usually end up with less than perfect cut. But it's usually pretty close. Now we only have a little bit of a problem here. I'm going to just take a chisel and just chop this down. And you can see I'm chopping the rosewood here. And if you don't do this, the binding won't sit flush up against the purfling, and you'll end up with a gap. And if you're using this color binding, it's going to be very hard to fill. We need to get these right off the glue up. But you just want to be very careful. Go all the way around the perimeter, finding anything that's jutting out, and just chisel it off. And when you go to fit the bindings, that'll reveal more. We're going to approximately cut these to length. We're not going to do it, to the final length, of course. We're just going to get close. So you want to, once again, tape this at the waist first. And we're just going to take a pencil and roughly mark where these need to be cut. I'm always going to cut them long at this point. We'll dial in the final length later. And again, we're going to mark it long and mark this side. Okay. Now, we also don't have exactly a great fit at the waist here. So what I'm going to do is actually take this over to the bending iron and bend it a little more in this waist area. And we just want to bend this just a little bit more in the waist area here. And just be careful. Let it warm up. Put a little pressure. And then we'll take it over here. And you'll fit it. And now it fits perfectly. And again, we're just marking these a little long. I've just extended the mark down along the inside here. We're just going to cut them off. And they're all considerably longer than they need to be. And that's just fine for right now. That's this side. And now the other. Once you find where that waist needs to be, it's a good idea to put a pencil mark both on the purfling and on the binding, so you end up in that same spot all the time. Now we're going to fit this into this bit here. And it looks like we're not going to have to take a whole lot off of here. And a scraper will probably do the trick. You just want to get it so that it fits in there without a struggle, because when you put glue in there, everything changes. Take off just ever so little bit at a time, and even resort to just a little sandpaper. And now it fits in there perfectly. So now we're lined up here, and now you can check this here. And now you can see that's right on the money. We pretty much got it right the first time. So now we're lined up back this way. So what we can do while we've got this good alignment here is we might as well just fit this in here and mark it on both sides. You want to line up the end of the binding at each side with the middle of this center strip. It just as with the other side, you just want to sand this and scrape it a little bit at a time until you get it sliding in there easily. You don't want it to be too tight, because once you put glue in there again, it's going to be a struggle to get it in. So that looks pretty good. That looks okay. And we're lined up, almost lined up. Now we're lined up here. Okay, so now we can mark the length of this one too. The center of the center strip. When I do this, what I want to do is first just cut them off and cut them just outside the line And then we're going to square them up with a sanding block because we want them to meet very nicely where they join together. We don't want to have any gaps there. And that's how we'll trim it actually, with the sanding block. I'll just hit this once or twice this way. There we go. This one. Yeah, we're just looking to square that edge. You want it. Want a nice fit in there. To final fit these, you just want to get them both at the point in the front end here and then clamp them down with a little bit of clamp pressure on them. We're going to tape this around in various spots to get as accurate as we can. Going right here. We're going to try to avoid having to chop this with the glue on there to make it fit. We still might have to do it, but we're going to try to avoid it if we can. This is pretty much right in the middle, as you can see. Now we just need to get the other side going. And the fit is really pretty good. This binding wood is very flexible, and I recommend you not making bindings any thicker than 90 thousandths, as they become too stiff and too difficult to get to fit in the channel if they're a little bit off in shape. 90 thousandths is a good thickness where you can get most woods to bend a little bit if you need to. And this is going to be just fine. We'll start to apply the glue. And again, you want to be pretty generous with this glue. And I'm going to stop short of putting glue all the way to the back edge, because it'll be a while before we get down there. Just wipe away this excess here. I'm going to start here, and it's going to be messy. I've got tape that I've already prepared here, so I don't have to stop and let go of this. I'm just going to put one piece of tape in here, and then I want to clamp this down to make sure that I'm getting a good seal on the bottom of the channel right up in here. And now I can continue. Clean as much of the glue as you go, and I'm going to put a placeholder piece of tape here. Okay. Remember, the force is both down and in. And overlap your tape at least by half. And it's always a good idea to stay a little bit ahead of yourself with the taping, because if not, you'll be fighting whatever's hanging off. Now, I'm going to sprinkle a few clamps around here just to make sure this sits right. And again, I'm going to stop short of having the glue all the way around to the back. we're going to start up here. We'll get a piece of tape or two going here. We'll clamp this down back up in here to assure that that part is at the bottom of the channel. I'm just going to add a little glue in the back to get this back part done. And we seem to be fitting pretty good. Now I'm going to continue putting clamps around the perimeter. And there we go. What this serves to do is two things. It pulls in these bindings up here, and it reins these in down here to get them nice and flush up against the back edge. So that's it. And we'll let this set up overnight before we come and start to clean it up. What we need to do is just get the bindings flush with the rosewood and clean up any glue residue in here. The best tool for this is a scraper. The scraper should be sharp and cut cleanly. You can certainly use sandpaper, but it will take a lot longer. Just scrape the bindings flush to the surface of the rosewood. And find a secure way to hold the guitar while you're doing this. What we're going to do here is cut away part of this purfling on the bottom of the binding. And we're going to cut away a piece, the width of this middle section in the butt strip of this satinwood. Now I've got it marked already here, and mark it with a knife. That's the best way to mark it. And you just want to chop down with your knife a little bit on each side and err on the part of making the notch too small. Don't make it too big at this point. Now the first thing you want to do is to chop in so that you can cut that material out without tearing the stuff you want to leave there. And then, using a small chisel, you need to chop this away. Now we're going to chop this up to the satinwood without touching the satinwood. You do not want to cut into the satinwood at all. So we're going to continue to chop. And the wood that remains, the purfling that remains, will be mitered. Again, take it in a little at a time. You want to have the cut go from the inside black to the tip of the blue. And that's it. I'm going to do the same thing to this other side. To cut this, you want your chisel to be very, very sharp. If it's not, you're going to crush the fibers and not cut them. Mark your orientation on the strip itself. You always want to be fitting it in the same way. So I've marked the back, and this will tell me which end is face up. I've mitered both purflings, and it's time now to miter this butt strip. Square up this edge. Set this on here so that it's in its final position, and you want to mark where the bottom black is here. Now, since these are straight, I should be able to just transfer this mark across to the other side with the knife, like that. So now, I have a mark on both sides, and that's where I'm going to chop to. Now, you want to chop down straight, and one way to tell is by looking at your stripes here. If you're not chopping straight, they won't be parallel. You don't want to chop all the way to the end. Notice I've left some blue here. That's because I'm going to actually sand that the rest of the way to make it fit. And you can see there's just a little bit of blue at the tip, and we need to sand that away. Looks like we've actually got a pretty good fit. This side needs to come down a little more. And that fits really well. All the stripes line up and there are no gaps. Now we need to measure this side. You want to sight down and mark the top blue where that ends, right on your butt strip there, like that. I've actually marked it already, extended a line across, and that's going to be the cut line. Now again, you're going to want to square this up and get a little closer with your sanding block. Sight down to where the blue meets, which looks like it's right at that notch there. And the same thing on the other side. Next, you want to make a mark here, again at the bottom of the black veneer on the binding purfling, and then just draw it across. Now take the piece that you've preliminarily trimmed there and stick it in to see if the size of your notch is correct. This side is okay, but this side needs a trim. Check again. Now that's right. Now we can miter this. And now we've got some trimming to do. We need to trim these back on both sides. But now I'm going to trim them with the sanding block. First get the angle right and then try to get the length right. Once the angles are cut right, the length is adjusted and you just keep the same angle as you go. It's a lot easier that way. And now it fits great. Now, before we glue it, I just want to relieve these black veneers on each side with a little bit of sandpaper. Okay, now. Okay, now it's fitting in there perfectly. We're going to use yellow glue to put this in, and don't put any glue on the actual miter joint itself. Just put it on the sides of the channel and on the bottom of the channel, and you do not need a ton of glue here. This is a real tight fitting piece. Yeah, we're just going to brush this around a little bit. Again, keeping the glue off of the joint. Bang it all the way down and plane it flush. Now that is looking really sharp. As in the book, we're going to use a standard size neck, which means we've got 53 millimeter width at the nut and a 63 millimeter width at the 12th fret. This is a very standard size instrument, and it's what I would usually build for a dealer if I was uncertain of the person that would be actually playing the guitar. It fits a broad range of people, and 90% even custom instruments are made to these dimensions. Now, if these dimensions don't suit you and you want to make it either smaller or whatever, please take the time and go back to the drawing and make sure that you take into consideration all the things that change in dimension will have on other parts of the guitar, such as the bridge. If you make this narrower, you're going to have to narrow the splay in the strings on your bridge and whatnot. So you want to do that before you start cutting any wood. You want to have a very clear idea of what you're about to do. The fingerboard is set to a scale length, which is determined when you design the instrument. Now, the scale length is just the length of the suspended string. It's the length from the nut to the saddle. The most popular scale length today is 650 millimeters, and that's what this guitar is going to be. So half of that is 325 millimeters. That's where the 12th fret is, which is right here. The 12th fret is also the octave. So in other words, once you half the length of a string, you increase the pitch by an octave. The guitar is an unusual instrument in that each string is required to play 19 and sometimes 20 notes. Once you set the octave to be correct, the rest of the frets are really an approximation of the notes that they're supposed to play. It's not exact. So in other words, on a guitar, you've got one note, say E, where you can play the same E in 4 or 5 different places on a guitar. It's more than likely that they're not all going to be in tune. They're all going to be slightly off. You're just looking to get the closest compromise. Now, the placement of the frets on this particular guitar that I'm building here and that have the plans available for, I use a little bit different fret placement. The standard is the rule of 18. It's a logarithmic formula used to calculate the position of the frets, and you calculate them, you cut them to that, and so on. Mine is amended slightly so that it gives a little better approximation up and down the fingerboard. You would have to then fashion this template to those numbers in order to cut your slots correctly. The fingerboard template is going to be used to actually shape this fingerboard, and it'll help a lot in placement. We've got registration holes in here, which we can put the pins in, and those pins line up with the registration holes in the upper bout of your plantilla, which you've also put into your Solera. And then you've got one pin here to keep this all straight. So when we go to put this together, it'll be very, very simple to line everything up. We won't have to use any rulers or anything like that. And we'll be very, very accurate. Now, this is a typical blank that you get from Luthier's Supply Place. This is about the size you get. Now, they're getting harder and harder to get quality ebony blanks, so good luck. Alternative materials also, you need to research whatever one you're using, because some of them have natural resins which make gluing less than optimal. And a fingerboard you want to stay on, so you want to be very careful about what kind of wood you use and how well it glues. So anyway, the quality fingerboard is one that's quarter sawn and evenly colored. You don't want any streaks in it and so on. And with ebony, as in this here, it's very hard to tell whether it's quarter sawn or not. You have to plane off the end and look very, very careful, almost with a microscope, to see the end grain lines. But if you buy it from a reputable dealer, you'll and specify quarter sawn, that's what you'll get. But we need to mill this to size, fret it, and then shape it. So let's get started. These are typical fingerboard blanks you get from Luthier's Supply Place. You want to pick the straightest ones, and you want to sight down the edge, and you're looking at this edge, and you want it to be straight. You don't want it to have any dip in it or a bow in it like that. And if it has a fairly significant dip or bow in it, don't use it. Try to use the flattest stuff. Also, try to use quarter sawn ebony. It's harder and harder to get these days, but if you can get it, that's ideal stuff to use. Jet black and having no streaks in it is also getting harder and harder to come by. So I'll put up with some streaks if I can get actually quarter sawn stock. So anyway, the first thing we're going to do with this blank is, in the book I suggested you get a slotted blank. I still suggest that if you're only building one guitar. If you plan to build more than one guitar, then you can think about building a slotting system, which we're going to use in a minute. But before we slot it, we need to get this prepped slightly. And what we need to do is dress one edge like this. We need to straighten the edge. So we can either straighten it with a hand plane on the bench and check it with a straight edge, or just do it on the joiner or whatever. But we need to get this edge straight. Now, lately, they've been also making fingerboard blanks smaller and smaller, so you don't want to take off too much material. You might end up with too thin a board. So what you want to do is, right off the bat, I would do this with a hand plane. That's the way to take the least amount of material to get it flat. Then we're going to thickness it to about 260 thousandths, which is about 10 thousandths thicker than it's going to end up being, because we don't want to back ourselves into a corner yet, where we want to be able to flatten the bottom after we slot it and make sure everything's going to go, and we'll show you what that's all about too. So let's get started. Okay, we're going to dress this edge, but first we want to find out how much wiggle room we have here with the width. So I've taken the fingerboard template, I'm going to place it on here, and you'll notice that we've got about 1/8 of an inch on each side here, so we're doing pretty good. You want to sight down this with your straight edge, and it looks like on this board from about here to here, it's got a bulge in it, which we need to remove. Okay, and that is straight. Okay, so now we've got a nice straight edge on there, like you can see. You need to flatten one face also, because you need a nice flat face to put on the table when you run it through the planer. That's very good. Okay. And we're going to take a little off each side. Don't just take it off of one side. You want to take a little bit off of each side. So here we go. Okay, and that's pretty good. We're about 260, 264, something like that. If you're going to slot your own boards, you need a system for your table saw. I don't advise anyone cutting them by hand. It's very inaccurate, and especially if you're inexperienced. This is a fairly simple system. There's 3 things that are necessary. One, you need this blade in your table saw. It's a 80, 62, something like that. They're sold by Lucia Supply people. It's about 25 thousandths wide. It's just right for your tang. It has two stabilization plates that fit on the outside to keep from wiggling back and forth. Next thing you need is a fixture like this. Very simple to make. You don't even need this piece in the front. I just put it there for stability. But you need a piece of any material, MDF, something flat. You're going to need a set of runners underneath, which I highly recommend this plastic material because it's very stable. You don't have to worry about it swelling on you and getting stuck in your slots. And you need a perpendicular fence back here with a little, it's a cone-shaped pin in here. Now this pin at the very base is about 3/32 wide, and these slots in this piece of acrylic are 3/32 wide, and it fits right in there like this. You can have this made up, and you can buy these cut to the rule of 18, which is, you know, the standard fret positioning. This particular set has a little compensation built in, which is a little better approximation for intonation across the fretboard of the instrument. The other thing is this zero fret is, this position of the zero fret on here has been calculated such that when you remove the wood underneath the slot you cut, that should be exactly where your nut goes. We'll actually dial it in later. In order to utilize your wood properly, you want to first orient your fingerboard template on here and determine what part of this board you want to use. Usually they're fatter at one end, so it's good to do this first so that you don't end up with the wrong end on the bottom. Okay, so we've determined that we want the end of the board to be here. So now that needs to be right where the blade cuts. So we're going to put that right over the blade, and then the first tick mark on here is the end of the board. So now all we have to do is tape this right like this on here and cut and make our first cut, move it into the second one, so on down the line, all 20 frets that way. I've got 3 pieces of double stick tape on here. I've aligned the top of the fingerboard with the cut line in the fixture, and now we're just going to peel this backing of this tape off and stick this on and begin the cut. The adhesive is quite strong, so I'm not really worried about this moving around. But you want to make sure everything's up against the fence so that you end up with some nice straight fret slots. Right after you slot it, you want to cut off the excess at the nut. The slot itself is eventually removed, but what I'm going to do is cut this on the saw just to this side of this slot here. And I'm going to leave like a little porch, which I'll hand plane away. There's a little porch across here where the wood underneath the fret slot is still there. And that we're going to plane away. We cut it at the 0 fret. And we've got a little step here where we've got like half the fret underneath still there. Now we need to remove that. And we need to get this scale length exactly right. And the way we're going to do that is I'm using this piece of metal as a backing piece just to make it easier to measure. And I've highlighted the 12th fret on here. Now when you put this ruler on, the 12th fret, the middle of this slot, should end up exactly over the 325 mark. Now in order to remove it, we're going to plane it off. And I've just chamfered the edges of this so we don't blow them out. It's a good practice, although this wood's going to come off anyway, it doesn't really matter. I don't like blowing out the edges. So now we just need to plane this, and since we already have a straight edge here, we want to keep it a straight edge. So take the edge that we straightened and sight along here, and you'll see that this back edge is a little high. So We'll take more off of this side. And now it's perfectly square. So now we'll refit it in here. And we've still got a little bit to go. Good, we're still square. And that's it, we're right smack in the middle. You want to double stick the template right on top of the fingerboard. And you can actually, we can trace out the size, but we're actually going to cut it right with the template on it. It just makes it a lot easier. And then, once it's cut and shaped, we're going to remove the template, put it on the other side, and then drill the registration holes. You want to cut as close to the template as you can without hitting it. That'll give you the least amount of cleanup when we're done. We put some silver marks on here, which will give us an indication of just how close we can come. We're also going to rough cut out this shape on the bottom here. And we'll finish that up later on a spindle sander. But here we go. Leave this part untouched until the very end when you're ready to fit it on the guitar. Just in case you're just a little off here or there, you can dial this in. And I usually leave this about a 1/16 long right up to the end. But for now, we're going to take these edges down. And I've got a little system here where I just use a straight edge. It keeps this from sliding back and forth as you're playing, and also keeps it straight. And you don't want to plane the template away. But there it is. That's about it. That looks pretty good. Now we'll do the other side. And do the same thing on the other side. I just rearrange these clamps to make it easier. We've got 53.2 here, and we've got 63.2 here, which is just about right. With sanding and all, we'll take those other 2.2 millimeters off. But this is pretty much ready to go. And just 2 pieces of tape will do it here. You don't need anything more than that. And these holes are very, very shallow, so you can drill them with a hand drill. You only go in a 1/16 of an inch or so. And I use this to line up the ends. And then just press it down, and you can see we got a perfect match all the way around. And now we can just drill these 3 holes. Like I said, don't go in very far. And that's probably far enough. If you need any further, when you peel this off, just take it over to drill press and drill through the same holes again. We've already got the holes drilled, and you can see it fits perfectly right where it's supposed to. Before we install this, we've taken the tape off the bindings. They're still a little bit proud all the way around. You need to flatten them to the surface of the top. We'll also sand off all the shellac that we put on here to protect the top from the tape. Now, if this was any other wood, I'd almost take it all the way down with the plane and then finish it off with a little scraper. But with this wood, I'm going to do it with the random orbit sander, just to preserve the edges on here and not to tear anything out. Because what we need to have happen is we need to have these bindings flush up here, and we need this whole area pretty much prepped before we put this on. So let's get started. Be careful up here. You don't want to build any dips or anything. You want to keep this nice and flat. But we want to, as you can see, we've got all of the shellac off. The bindings are flush. We haven't torn them out or anything. And we're just going to keep going and do the rest of the top. Okay. What we're concerned about is this bottom region here. This needs to be flat. So you want to put a straight edge on there like that. And you don't want to see any light underneath here. And this is looking really nice. This is pretty flat. That means that we've done the shaping of the rims correctly and everything's going to line up. Now we need to check the setup before we put the fingerboard on, not after. So I'm going to put the dummy nut up here. And I've got a dummy saddle and bridge here, which is going to give me approximately the height of the strings above the top. It's 11.5 millimeters. Its front edge is approximately the position of the saddle. Now I'm going to take this ruler, position it on the nut, which I've actually slotted here, and I'm going to put it at about the position of the 5th string. And then I'm going to measure down from here to the surface of the top, which is going to give me 1.54 inches. Okay, once I subtract the thickness of the ruler, I end up with 415 thousandths. Now you want to add 10 or 15 thousandths to this, because when you put the strings on, it actually pulls the neck forward slightly. So we're going to add 15 thousandths, and now our number that we're working with is 430 thousandths. We're looking for an action around 140 or so on the bass side. So that leaves us, if we subtract that action, that'll leave us with 290 thousandths of space where the fingerboard needs to be. And don't forget, the fret sits on top of here, and its height is 37 thousandths. So if we're starting with a fingerboard that's 250 thousandths, and we put a 37 thousandths fret on here, we're at 287. Our calculations give us the height of this fingerboard should be 290. So we're close enough to just leave it alone and put it on as it is. The fingerboard needs to be 250 thousandths. You need to measure your thickness. I always tend to leave them a little heavy. You can always take some off. You can't put it back. So this is going to need to be trimmed down just ever so slightly. And when you trim your fingerboard down thickness-wise from here on out, you want to trim the underneath side. So we're going to take some few strokes off of here, only a couple thousandths need to come off. And making sure that you're actually keeping it flat. And you want to check this way also. The tendency for these things is that you end up with a gap like we have here at the edge. That's what you don't want. You actually want a very slight dip where the edges are touching and you got a little bit of gully in the middle. So we're going to build that in, and that will give you the best glue surface. That's better. Okay, and you want to just see ever so little bit of light. Use your scraper and just make a little, because the scraper you can actually press it and deform the shape. Put a little bit of a belly in there. You want a little bit of a bow in here, and you want like a dip from here to about the 3rd or 4th fret. Now you can sight down here, and this is dead flat right now, and it's dead flat all the way down the sound hole, which is exactly what we want. But don't forget, we bang the frets in, it's going to want to bow up, so we want to actually make this a little bit dipped. So we're going to start planing across the grain from here. Always across the grain. You can clean it up by going with the grain in the end. By planing across the grain, you're keeping this flat and not building any wind into it, and that is really important. And in the end, you just want to take full strokes with the grain. And that should do it. Last thing I want to do is I'll hit this with some sandpaper, but first I want to make sure this porch up here is clean. Just take your shoulder plane and give a stroke or two up here, and just take off ever so little wood, and that should do it. And that's pretty good. Now we can clean this and then sand everybody. And you're also now that you flatten this, you've actually improved the glue surface. Now take a nice flat sanding block and remove all the tool marks from here. I've fastened the template in place here, and what I need to do is reestablish the registration holes. Because we put the top on and so on, we've got some glue clogging them up, and we just want to reestablish them. And this one has taken a beating from being put in and out on the Solera. We'll glue this pin in, and we're just going to saw it off just slightly above the surface. We do not need too much dowel sticking out of there. That's probably plenty. We just need enough to keep the fingerboard from moving around while we clamp it. Just be careful sawing over your top. Once you saw the dowels, the tops of them might actually get a little wider. So you might need to go around with a little file and clean them up so that when you put the fingerboard on, you don't smash them. Okay, so here we go. And that is a really good fit right there. Now what we need to do is trim this and shape it. You want to register the fingerboard to the template and use it as a guide to shape this. And if you're a little off on the guitar, you can actually, leave a little or take a little more away, whatever you need. This one we seem to be right on the money. We're going to apply some wax. Now any paste wax will do. You just want to rub a little wax on both the fingerboard and the top where they meet. And what that'll do is it'll keep the glue from sticking to the top, which is what we want here. So we're going to try to work neatly. So just a little wax and that'll do it. I've marked on the fingerboard where the 12th fret is, because what I'm going to do is actually push back the glue above the upper bout so that we get a minimal amount of squeeze out there, because that's a huge glue surface area. So you want to apply the glue, we're going to roller it on like usual. The other thing is, past this point, this isn't touching anything, so there's no reason to put any glue out there. And once again, we want to regulate how much glue we get on here. Just wipe it back like that. And do the same thing down around here. There's still glue there. There it is. We're going to use the template as a caul. Since we made a dip, we're going to start to clamp in the middle. Now these are just to protect the part we've already shaped underneath there. We're going to need to actually raise the back. Now we're not going to use a fabulous amount of force here either. And you want to make sure your caul is making contact underneath. And that is really good. I've got this caul with a channel cut out of it. That'll fit over the brace inside the sound hole. We'll put that in there, put it over the brace, and then just use these little clamps to clamp this back edge back here. And that should do it. Should you get any squeeze out, wait 10 minutes and then use your crook neck chisel to clean it away. And it should come right off. This is good to go. Now you just tighten them down, and you can see up in here we've got just the right amount of squeeze out going on. Now you want to let this cure. You don't want this, you don't want to take these clamps off in a half an hour. I'd leave this overnight. Before we can route this waste material away, we should cut most of it off on the bandsaw. We're going to leave about 1/16 of an inch because that's all you should really cut with the router. So you can do this with a handsaw, no question. I prefer to do this on the bandsaw. You need a little block like this to keep the guitar above the level of the table and also to keep the neck stable. It works quite well, and it's not as scary as it looks. And notice also I've put some protection on the top of this guitar, which from now on we're going to be having something like this on top at all times. Okay, so we're ready to cut. I'm going to trim away this excess here with this router. This is not too much wood for this bit. As you can see, it's got a bearing on the top, and it's about a 3/8 inch diameter trim bit. It's long enough to cut this entire piece, and we're just going to use the fingerboard as a template. Don't go all the way up to the end here. Leave about, 3/4 of an inch or so, because you run the risk of actually getting caught in this nut channel here. And don't go down all the way down the end on the other side either. After you've trimmed this and before you shape it, now's the time to fret. You don't want to be banging frets in with soft neck wood after it's been shaped. You want to do it right now. But before we do that, we want to check our setup again. So get out the dummy nut, the dummy saddle, put them back in position, and just check the height on your 12th fret here to make sure that everything is what you think it's supposed to be. Now this is 1.3, we subtract the ruler, we end up with 175 thousandths. Now 175 thousandths, we need to compensate for the 37 thousandths height of the fret. So we're going to end up a little less than 140. Once the strings come on, bring it up another 10,000. We're about right where we're supposed to be. So we don't have to taper this board at all. We can put everything on just the way it is. But the only thing I'm going to do is relieve the edges of this a little bit. In other words, I don't want to put an arc in it, but I want to knock these down just a few thousandths because they have a tendency to curl up with humidity and age and so on. And we want to prevent that from being a problem down the road. Fingerboards have a tendency to curl up with time, with humidity. We're just going to relieve ever so little.
Relieve about 10 thousandths or 0.3 millimeters from each side.
And that's probably enough. Now before we fret this, you want to get this looking pretty good.
Also check the fingerboard for flatness along its length. I have checked this board with a straight edge and it is dead flat. Scrape, then sand out any marks left by the plane.
Before we put the frets in here, you just want to bevel the edges of the slot. Now this is a triangle file, and we're just going to go down each and every slot and just chamfer off the top. Repair people down the road will thank you for doing this. What it does is it gets the top wood out of the way, so if you ever have to pull the frets out of here, you won't pull your fingerboard up with it. This is about all the fret wire you'll need for one instrument. This is a standard classical fret wire. It's 18% nickel, and it's kind of soft as compared to a steel string wire. Now you just want to sight down and snip it off so that you've got a little bit hanging off on each side. And before you go banging it in, look at the tang and make sure it's straight at the end. If it's not, this one is, but if it's not, you just want to re-straighten it with a pair of pliers. Now we're going to add a little bit of white glue to the tang. You want to set it in and then just tap it. If you have a pair of these kind of cutters with the flat bit on top, you can then snip it off right at, so there's only a tiny bit left hanging off there. So clean the glue. And the little scraper is fabulous for this. You can clean the glue right up to the fret. Next one. And once we get a few in, we can actually start to check to see how flat they are with respect to each other. And that'll greatly minimize the amount of flattening you'll have to do after the fact. Again, make sure the tangs are straight. Once we get this one cleaned up, we'll check it for flatness. We're going to use the fret leveling kit, and you just want to sit this across the 3 frets like that. And if you can make a clicking noise like that, that indicates that this is a little high at that spot. So now we've got no noise at all. So now we've got it flat. When we go to dress this, when we're finished, we'll have much less fret to remove to get everything flat. And you keep doing that all the way down the fingerboard. Once you get up past the heel block underneath your fingerboard, you don't want to be banging in really hard to get these frets in. So what I do is I take them and I file off a little bit of the tang to make them a little bit easier to get in. They're still in there snugly, you just don't have to hit as hard to get them in. And now you just put them in just like you would any other. And you notice that one went in quite a bit easier than the others. Now for this fret, which is the last full fret, I'm going to file off all the tang. And what I'm going to do is put 3 crimps in it that'll act like tangs to hold it in. Because I really don't want to bang very hard over that. What we'll actually do after we get it in is use a clamp to get it down. And I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to put a couple of crimps in here. And this is just a tool I fashioned out of a pair of long nose pliers where I made an indent in one side and shaped the other one to a V. So now when I squeeze this here, I'll put one at one end, one in the middle, and one over here. You see I've made 3, in effect, tangs here. And that'll be plenty to hold that in. So I'm going to put some glue, just like with the other ones. Gently bang this one in. Now I'm not going to get too crazy trying to get it all down and flat. We'll do that with the clamp. Because don't forget, we've got this little guy to get in there too. Again, take it all off. I'm going to put 2 crimps in here. Line up this inside bit first. And I usually like to get the nicest edge on that inside bit. Again, we're going to come back with a clamp and push it down the rest of the way. Now to make sure these are all the way down, I'm going to use this caul, which is notched to fit over this lower transverse brace. I'm going to stick it under there like that, and then take this little clamp and position it right on these frets and just clamp them down. And what I'll do is I'll squeeze them down and then loosen it, move it a little more, and just go from one end to the other. And this will get that fret all the way down. Very good. Okay. We need to get these points down and flush to the board like these two that I've done right here. When you file this, keep your file flat and don't tilt it like this, or you're going to put a nice sized gash in your fingerboard. And you'll know when you're done because you'll be filing just wood. Now, to do in here, you're going to need to remove this wood that's sticking up here. Just take a chisel and just cut it almost flush. Now, as I get up into here, I like to use a file with a safe edge. You notice that the file marks have been shaved off of this edge. That edge won't cut. So that's the edge I want up against the guitar. So I'm going to file this one with the safe edge in. To get up in here, I'm using a piece of sheet metal. I'm just going to cover these and file them down like this.
And now, the other side.
Some of your frets might have a little space at the bottom of them where they didn't quite reach the bottom of the channel that you cut. In that case, what you need to do, at least what I do, is fill with stick shellac. This is just a little dental tool actually. You just want to heat this up and then melt some of this stick shellac on here. And then just come in here and fill a hole up with it. And you want to get it in the hole really good. Make sure it melts down in there. We'll then file it off the same way we filed down the ends of the frets. And there you go. The last thing we're going to do for now with the frets is to bevel the edges of these. I've started this on the outside here, and you can see the ends of the frets are beveled back slightly. You want to actually bevel a little bit of the ebony. You want to go that far. So we're going to continue doing this, and the tool to do this is sold in luthier supply houses, most of them. It's just a file held in an angle in a wooden block. You want to put a nice even bevel on the ebony from top to bottom. After you use this beveling tool, these tips are still a little sharp. What you need to do is come in here with some sandpaper and just very lightly sand them back. And we won't do anything else to this until the guitar is all set up. One thing that's very helpful to all players, including myself, is to have an indicator on here for the 7th fret. It just makes such a huge difference. What I use as an indicator is just a small piece of 19 gauge galvanized wire, and this is it right here. We're going to set that into a spot in between the 6th and 7th frets. Now this guitar is for a right-handed player. You orient it the way you need to do it. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We're going to put it in between these two frets, and it helps to use some kind of ruler
to find the middle of the two frets.
And with an awl, we're going to make a mark. Make a little dent in there to start the drill. You need a very tiny bit, and I much prefer to use this hand drill. And just drill down, and that's probably good enough. Now I've taken 2-part epoxy, it's 5-minute epoxy, And I got both parts on this little board. We're just going to mix them together. We're going to coat that thing and stick it in there. And you don't need a whole lot, but you want to get some down in the hole so that this will stay in there. And the epoxy will act as a filler also, so we won't need to fill anything. It'll be nice and smooth and when we're done. So we just want to, let's get a little bit of this onto the, there we go. Just want to put it on the piece, and then we're going to drive a little bit of this down into the hole. There we go. Now we're just going to let it sit, and in a little while we'll come back and trim it flush. To dress this 7th fret indicator, you just need to nip that off and then take a file and file it flat. And this is a 5-minute epoxy. It might not be totally hard at this point, but it's good enough for our purposes, and it'll leave a nice clean hole. And there you go. That's pretty much it.